On a Thursday morning in March of 1984, a 26-year-old farmer named Cal Rutherford sat across a desk from the loan officer at First National Bank of Sumner, Iowa, and listened to a man explain why the land his grandfather had farmed for 50 years was worthless. The loan officer's name was Gerald Marsh. He had a folder in front of him with numbers in it, and he went through those numbers the way men do when they have already made their decision and are only being thorough for the record. The farm was 160 acres. Cal's father had borrowed $240,000 against it in 1978, when land in Bremer County was selling for $1,500 an acre, and everyone agreed prices would keep climbing. Now it was 1984, and that same land was appraised at $87,000. The bank held collateral worth 36 cents on the dollar. Gerald Marsh closed the folder. "The soil profile on your North 80 is below county average," he said. "Your yield history confirms it. We've had the same analysis on that ground for 3 years running. The land isn't going to perform well enough to service this debt." He paused. "I'm sorry, Cal. We're going to have to begin foreclosure proceedings." Cal drove home without saying much. "Let me tell you about the farm crisis of 1984, because you need to understand what surrounded Cal before you can understand what he did." Interest rates in the United States had climbed past 20%. The Federal Reserve had tightened money to kill inflation, and what it killed instead were family farms. In Iowa alone, farmland had already lost 40% of its value in 3 years, and it was not finished falling. Farm debt across the country had hit $215 billion by that year, double what it had been in 1978. 1 in 3 Iowa farmers was in serious financial trouble. Banks were failing. Equipment auctions were happening every week in every county, selling off the machinery of broken dreams. And an Iowa farmer reflecting on that time later said something that stayed with people long after the crisis ended. He said, "There were a lot of good farmers who did everything right, but their timing was bad." Cal Rutherford had inherited all of this when his father died of a heart attack the previous spring, plowing the south field on a Tuesday afternoon in April. His father was 52 years old and had been fighting the crisis for 2 years by then. Cal had grown up on that farm, had always planned to take it over someday, had just never planned for it to happen like this. He had $4,000 in a savings account, a pickup truck with 140,000 miles on it, and 160 acres of Iowa land that a bank had just told him wasn't worth farming. What he also had, though he didn't know it mattered yet, was a shed behind the main barn where his grandfather's equipment had sat untouched since 1961. Let me tell you about the Oliver, because the tractor is the whole story. Cal's grandfather, August Rutherford, bought an Oliver Hartpar row crop tractor new in the spring of 1930. He paid $1,100 for it, more money than most families in Bremer County had seen in a single transaction. Since the crash, August had saved for 3 years to buy it, had driven to Charles City, Iowa, to pick it up himself, had brought it home on a flatbed, borrowed from a neighbor while his wife stood in the yard watching. It arrived like something from another world. The Oliver Hartpar was unlike anything the county had seen. It rode on rear wheels nearly 5 feet in diameter, adjustable along a straight rear axle, so a farmer could set them wide for cultivating and narrow for plowing, a problem every other tractor manufacturer had failed to solve cleanly. It burned kerosene, not just gasoline, which mattered enormously during the Depression years when a farmer's fuel choices were the difference between planting a crop and not planting one. The company itself had described its machines that year as tractors with surplus power, meaning they were built to do more than asked, built with room to spare. August used that tractor for 31 years, through the Depression, through the war, through the post-war boom. When he died in 1961, his son parked the Oliver in the equipment shed, covered it with a canvas tarp, and bought a newer diesel model. The tractor sat there for 23 years. Nobody touched it. Nobody thought about it. It waited the way old things wait, without complaint, in the dark. Cal found it in November of 1983 while clearing out the shed to sell whatever he could before the bank moved further. He pulled back the canvas expecting rust and rot. What he found instead was a machine in almost perfect condition. August Rutherford had been that kind of man. Every grease fitting packed, every metal surface oiled and protected. The engine had not run in 23 years, but it was whole. The original implement attachments were stacked neatly against the wall beside it, including a deep tillage subsoil plow. Cal had never seen used in his lifetime and couldn't immediately explain. And tucked behind the tractor's iron seat, inside a leather pouch August had stitched himself, was a notebook. Let me tell you about what was in that notebook, because this is where the story turns. August Rutherford had kept records his entire farming life. Yields by field, rainfall by week, observations about soil and drainage, and what worked and what didn't. He wrote the way farmers of that generation wrote. Plain and precise, nothing wasted. Cal sat in that cold shed in November and read for 2 hours without stopping. August had written extensively about the North 80. He noted that in the early 1950s, after years of heavy equipment passes from combines and tractors, the soil in that field had developed what he called a hardpan layer about 14 inches down, a compressed band of earth so dense that roots could not push through it. He described what it looked like when he dug test holes in the field. The upper soil loose and brown and alive, then a distinct line, and below it a gray layer hard as packed clay, sometimes an inch thick, sometimes 3. He wrote that the roots of his corn plants were hitting that layer and spreading sideways, like a man pressing his palm flat against a ceiling. They could not reach the moisture and nutrients below. Every year he lost yield he couldn't explain to anyone who hadn't dug down and looked. Here is what that means in plain language. Corn roots grow downward searching for water and nitrogen and phosphorus stored deep in the soil. When a hardpan layer forms, the roots hit that ceiling and stop. They spread sideways instead, staying shallow, depending entirely on surface moisture. In a dry summer, the whole crop suffers. In a wet one, it drowns. The plant never reaches what the ground is holding below that line, and the farmer never understands why his yields are low because the problem is invisible. You cannot see it from the surface. You cannot see it from a tractor. You can only see it if you get on your hands and knees and dig. August Rutherford had dug. He broke that hard pan every third year with the deep subsoil plow behind the Oliver, working at 16 inches depth instead of the standard 8. He recorded the results in careful columns. In the years after subsoiling, his yields on the North 80 matched or exceeded his best ground anywhere on the farm. In the years he skipped it, they fell back. He understood exactly what he was doing and exactly why it worked. When Cal's father took over and bought modern equipment, he stopped using the subsoil plow. He didn't know about the hard pan. August had never had the chance to tell him. And modern tractors were heavier, far heavier than the Oliver. And with every single pass across that field, they were packing the soil tighter. Nobody told him this was happening. The yields dropped slowly enough that it looked like marginal land, not damaged land. By the time Cal inherited the farm, the North 80 was producing 94 bushels of corn per acre. The county average was 138. Gerald Marsh at First National Bank had looked at 3 years of that number and concluded the ground was poor. The ground was not poor. It was suffocating. There was nothing wrong with the soil that a deep plow could not fix. If someone still had one, and if someone understood why it mattered, and if someone was stubborn enough to try. Cal spent 4 months restoring the Oliver. He found a retired mechanic in Waverly named Eldon Kopecki who was 71 years old and hadn't touched a kerosene tractor in 3 decades, but remembered every piece of one. Eldon came out on Saturdays. They rebuilt the carburetor together and replaced the magneto points and repacked every bearing and cleaned the fuel lines end to end. It was slow, methodical work. 2 old men's knowledge transferred to 1 young man's hands. Cal didn't tell anyone at the bank what he was doing. There was nothing to tell them yet. On a Saturday morning in late March of 1984, 3 weeks after foreclosure proceedings began, Cal climbed onto the Oliver's iron seat, primed the carburetor the way Eldon had shown him, and pushed the hand crank. The engine turned over once, twice. On the 3rd turn it caught, rough at first, stumbling, then finding its rhythm. A deep 4-cylinder sound that had not come from that shed in 23 years. Cal sat there for a long time with his hands on his knees, listening to a machine his grandfather had bought before Cal's father was born, running like it had never stopped. He planted the North 80 that spring with the Oliver working ahead of his seeder, the subsoil plow cutting 16 inches deep, shattering the hardpan layer. August had described in that notebook 30 years earlier. It was slow. The Oliver made 6 miles an hour at best. Neighbors driving the county roads slowed down to watch him, wondering why a man in the middle of a foreclosure was out behind a tractor. From before the Second World War, a few of them stopped and asked. Cal told them he was trying something. He did not explain what or why. He let them think what they wanted. He had read the notebook. They hadn't. The harvest came in October. The North 80 yielded 143 bushels per acre, not against a weak year, against a county average of 138, against his own 3-year average of 94, against a bank appraisal that had evaluated that specific ground as below average and not worth the debt against it. Let me tell you about the 3 years that followed. Because one good harvest can be luck, and Cal knew it. What changes a man's circumstances is not one number. It is 3 numbers in a row that cannot be explained away. In 1985, the North 80 yielded 149 bushels. In 1986, it yielded 156. Cal subsoiled every other season exactly as his grandfather's notebook prescribed, alternating fields, working the Oliver at 16 inches, keeping records in a notebook of his own that he stored in the same shed. He added the south field and his east acres to the rotation. His overall farm yield climbed from 94 bushels per acre to 147 in 3 seasons on ground that a professional appraisal had written off as structurally poor. In the spring of 1987, Gerald Marsh called Cal into the office. The same desk, the same folder. This time the folder had different numbers in it, and Gerald Marsh went through them with an expression Cal recognized. The expression of a man who has made a conclusion. He now has to revise in front of the person he made it about. Cal's yield history over 3 seasons was the strongest per acre performance of any comparable operation in Bremer County. The land the bank had appraised at $87,000 in 1984 was worth $140,000 by 1987. Gerald Marsh offered to refinance the remaining loan at a reduced rate. He said the original appraisal had clearly underestimated the ground's potential. Cal nodded and said he appreciated that. He did not say what he was thinking. He did not mention the notebook, or the tractor, or the 16 inches, or the 30 years of careful records his grandfather had kept in a leather pouch behind an iron seat. He signed the new papers and drove home. The Oliver Hart Parse still runs. Cal Rutherford farms that same 160 acres today, along with his daughter, who learned to operate the tractor at 14. The same age August learned to work horses on that ground in 1918. The subsoil plow comes out every other autumn, 16 inches deep, breaking what the heavy equipment packs down, doing in a day what no soil amendment or fertilizer program can replicate. The North 80 has not gone below 140 bushels in 20 years. The farm is paid off. The bank that began foreclosure proceedings in 1984 closed its Sumner branch in 1992. August Rutherford bought that tractor in 1930 for $1,100. He ran it for 31 years, parked it carefully, protected it against time, and left behind a notebook that his grandson found in a cold shed on a November afternoon when he had $4,000 and a foreclosure notice and no reason left to believe the land was worth saving. The bank said the land was worthless. A notebook and a tractor from 1930 said otherwise. That is what happens when you take care of old things, and old things take care of you.